thank you very much for joining us this morning for basically writing up your project or the Effective Writer's Toolkit. So tips to how to get you to start writing productively. So a bit of the roadmap of the session for today. One, we're going to talk about basically ways to approach your academic writing. Also, next, we're going to talk about different types of writing practices. And I think this is really important to realize that there's not just one way to approach our academic writing. There's a variety of different ways. And so becoming aware of that helps you to kind of see what might work for you. We're going to then talk a little bit about some strategies to make your writing stronger. This can be, for example, looking about cleaning up your writing or creating templates. And last but not least, we're going to talk about how do you get through writer's block, that ever-dreaded writer's block that sometimes seems to kind of hit all of us at different stages of our writing process. So I always like to start off with basically this image of the writing process. And I think it's really helpful because often when we think about writing, we can often think about it in a very linear way. So, okay, I get my assignment, I do my research, I take my notes, I start writing, I basically get a draft in and basically review it, and it's done. But often that's a very simple way of thinking about it. And writing, as many of you will know probably, or if you're in it at the moment, can often be somewhat a very recursive, messy thing at the times. And it's okay to feel that way, and it's okay to think of it that way. So here we've listed some of the primary steps. So like I said, pre-writing, identifying your audience, defining the purpose, thinking. There's the drafting stage, so using efficient language, questioning, organizing, rethinking. You get a draft in, you get some peer feedback, and then you have to kind of go back into the cycle and revise. And if you think about what we've been doing this term with WolfWorks, we have kind of been helping you to prepare for these stages of the writing process. So we thought about time management in our very first workshop. So really thinking about the picture of how you're going to divide this task so that you give yourself enough time to successfully get through each step. Then we talked about literature searching, and this is kind of definitely goes into this first pre-writing stage. So identifying, thinking, gathering your ideas, identifying your information need. What do you need to get in order to start writing? We talked about reference management. So thinking about that bibliography from the very beginning, but also as a really helpful way to kind of organize your information. Then we talked recently, our last workshop, on critical reading and note making. So working through your readings, how do you organize your notes? How do you make them effective for your needs? But also thinking about them in a certain way as these type of pre-writing kind of zero draft moments where you kind of really get to express your ideas and hopefully carry them forward into your writing. So when we think about writing, then we can think about it in a couple of different ways. And I like to think about it as writing as thinking, writing as a type of conversation, and writing as a process. So here's this wonderful quote from Helen Swart, who's this amazing scholar on writing, and it comes from her work, Air and Light and Time and Space, How Successful Academics Write. And she says, for many academics, writing is an essential part of the research process. It's generative task. Or form of thinking. And that's really quite nice to think about that, of what writing does for us. And so when we think about writing as thinking, it's a way of how we figure out what we actually do think and believe in our writing, especially when we're thinking about basically our topics. Sometimes we need to kind of put them out into the world, either whether you like the analog version of a notebook, kind of like I do, or you also basically put it on your computer screen. You go right into the computer laptop. That's completely fine. But being able to kind of struggle a little bit can be helpful because it really helps us to refine. And so that also goes into this idea that of when we're writing, we're also connecting ideas, our own ideas from pieces of works that we're thinking about, we've read, and we're also trying to find our own voice and direction. Writing also clarifies our own thinking. So I don't know if you, but for me, sometimes when I've written something and I've given it a couple of days to kind of, sorry, a couple of days just to sit, I come back to it and I come back to it with a bit of fresh eyes and said, actually, that's not quite right what I was trying to say. But I'm only able to do that because I've had a chance to kind of get it out there. Also, when we think about thinking, sometimes it can be the hardest part, getting started. And that's something just to recognize right from the very beginning that, yeah, it's okay to feel like it is a bit difficult to get started. So when we think about then as writing as a conversation, I think this really kind of helps me. And I'm a bit of a romanticist in terms of the great conversation of humanities. I come from a humanities background, so I taught in the program about great books and this wonderful image of basically the great conversation of ideas. And I kind of think that writing is a bit like that as well. When we take on a topic, we're always in conversation. We're in conversation with the knowledge community that we belong to, our discipline, the ideas and writers that have shaped our discipline. But most importantly, and I think people often forget, is that basically we're also in conversation with our own readers. And that's the important person that needs to be in the thought of when you think about your writing, your reader. And part of this is because writing is a social act. It can't be a monologue. So what that means is that you can't just be writing for yourself when you're doing this type of academic writing. You have to always think, what does the reader need to know? What does the reader need to see in order to see the ideas and the connections that I'm having between these ideas? And so that's why it means it can't be a monologue here. And in that sense, there's a necessity to kind of build a coalition. Pat Thompson is another wonderful scholar who talks about this. And what she means by this is by recalling different types of ways in which the community that you are engaged in, your discipline, your field, has been thinking about this conversation that you're writing about. So part of this can be involved basically referring back to papers that have already been written in the field, basically particular discussions, debates, and then also showing basically the need for this conversation to continue. So what is it that hasn't been talked about that deserves a little bit more attention? What is the type of current context that we need to keep talking about this? So that's what it means by building a coalition. In a certain sense, if you're writing a dissertation project, this idea of the literature review helps to kind of establish that. It helps to kind of sketch out what are the critical debates, what are the themes that are emerging, and this kind of shows your reader that you're aware of this type of thing, the type of issues, and also establishes the need to keep talking about it, right? So then once you've built this coalition, then the big question becomes, how do you maintain this coalition with the reader throughout this text? So the reader has given you that first goodwill to say, okay, I'm going to keep reading. So how do you keep that goodwill up? And part of that is by establishing this type of argument based on evidence, interpretation, theories, and keeping that very red line that goes through the very beginning, where you talked about the context and the need to continue the conversation, all the way through the rest of the body of your project there. So, and keeping it clear so that the reader can recognize, okay, this is what is happening throughout the text. I'm not lost. I don't understand why this part, I'm not thinking to myself, I don't understand why the writer is talking about this. So keeping that very clear red line throughout your project is a way of maintaining that coalition with the reader. And last but not least, so when we think about writing, we can think about it as a process and not as an outcome. So as going back to that image that I showed, writing is made up of a series of steps, events and moments. So as I said, we talked about time management, thinking about on a wider scale, the literature searching, note making, composition, revising, and proofreading there. So thinking about it as this type of process makes it a little bit less stressful and more balanced in this way. So rather than thinking about the end, like, well, I have to write this 10,000 word or 15,000 word project and only focusing on that aspect of the writing project, by being able to see it as this process composed of various steps, various self-contained, in a certain sense, processes, it makes it much more manageable to think about that. And thinking that writing and the ideas that come from writing regularly help us to build this type of momentum. especially in moments where sometimes we might be a little bit more time poor, or moments when we actually have a really good set of time to kind of really in focus. So thinking and keeping contact with your writing can be helped. There are also short writing activities that can help you feel connected to your writing, and we can talk a little bit about that towards the end of this presentation. And by thinking about it as a process, our overall productivity can be heightened. So as I said, it's not just that end product of 15,000 words or 60,000 words, depending on the length of the project. But basically thinking about it in these steps that are much more manageable allows us to then be a bit more productive with that writing. So I thought it's really helpful to kind of then take a look at some of the writing habits. And I stole this title of this slide from an old television show, Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous. Probably many of you will not know what I'm talking about. If you look it on YouTube, you'll see. It used to the intro used to be, and these are the lifestyles of the rich and famous. But thinking about it in terms of writing and our own academic writing, we often hear figures that we somewhat admire. We have favorite writers, right? And we try to think about what is their writing process. So I thought it would be good to just kind of bring a little bit of that here. So here we have Patricia Highsmith, and she's an American novelist, a short story writer as well, really well known for her psychological thrillers. I think she had a series of 5 novels, including The Character of Tom Ripley. And overall, she wrote 22 novels. So you would probably say that this is somebody that is very successful in their writing process, right? But here's a bit of an excerpt of how she would get into the writing process. So her favorite technique to ease herself into the right frame of mind for work was to sit on her bed surrounded by cigarettes, ashtray, matches, a mug of coffee, a donut, and an accompanying saucer of sugar. She had to avoid any sense of discipline and make the act of writing as pleasurable as possible. Her position, she noted, would almost feel fetal, and indeed her intention was to create, she said, a womb of her own. And I love that little play on words at the very end of Virginia Woolf's A Room of Her Own. So yeah, any thoughts on that, of how that sounds? And you can pop it into chat if you'd like. Sounds a bit almost unstructured for me. We can recognize it, right? I mean, it's often somewhat different from a way. Um, but this idea, yeah, it sounds way too chaotic for you, yes? Yeah, but it's something that worked for her, right? That's quite interesting, and I think that's kind of recognizing basically what is the atmosphere, what is the context that we need in order to make our writing possible. For me, it's a bit of this room that I'm in. I love my lamp. I have to have lamp lights. I can't have overhead lights in the room. So I needed a bit dim lit. I have an old, basically, keyboard from Dell, which I'll show you here. Uh, Here, right there. It makes a clickety clickety sound. So we kind of redid this for a laptop, and it was just the sound of the that kind of helps me. So really just becoming aware and conscious about what is it, the situation, are the contexts that make it a bit more conducive for your own writing. And it's also helpful to think about, some of these other famous writers that we've seen that also, like Franz Kafka, who basically wrote the Metamorphoses. And here's an excerpt of his. So January 20th, the end of writing. When will it take me up again? The 29th, again tried to write, virtually useless. Uh, January 30th, the old incapacity interrupted my writing for barely 10 days and already cast out. Once again, prodigious efforts stand before me. You have to dive down, as it were, and sink more rapidly than that which sinks in advance of you. February the 7th, complete standstill, unending torments. March the 11th, how time flies. Another 10 days and I have achieved nothing. It doesn't come off. A page now and then is successful, but I can't keep it up. The next day, I'm powerless. So some of you may relate to some of these type of things. Just those very long droughts of writing. And I think it's helpful to know that you're not alone. Some of the greatest writers have undergone these type of long droughts as well. But thinking about then about some of the basically writing myths that we live by. And a lot of us are somewhat shaped by type of writing advice that we have received, perhaps from teachers or other writers that we greatly admire. And they, in a certain sense, they shape the way we view ourselves as writers. These type of myths have a bit of power over us because sometimes they're often, as I said, proposed by writers that we admire, and the results can often we can take them as truth. Because I mean, okay, this person is successful. I should do that, and I will be as successful. But what happens? I think the question comes is what happens when that advice doesn't necessarily match up with our own writing practice? And I think this is a question. So Menti is down for basically repairs at the moment, so we can disregard the Menti. But I have a question. Throughout our life, you may have encountered many writing myths as well, such as what a good writer does. So if you'd like to share, and this is not compulsory, but if you'd like to share, you can think about what is a one myth that you've encountered and how has that helped or hindered your writing practice. So you see, we're not just focusing on the negative. Maybe a good piece of advice that you received that's kind of been helpful, or maybe that doesn't quite work for you. And if you'd like to share that in the chat, that would be great.
Hi, Alberta. It's Aggie here.
Hi, Aggie. Or
I'm
you can,
sort
yeah, definitely. You can also do it on voice if you like.
yeah, because my hands aren't free. But basically, just I always had this idea that to do good writing, you have to wake up early and do it in a library, and I've definitely over the years found that really obstructive to my process. I mean, it took me a long time to actually, I remember a friend just saying, if you find that you do your best work in a cafe, go and write in a cafe. And it sounds so basic, but it was just that, okay, I can do that and I can try that. Sometimes it's breaking down these sort of things, as you say, that we've sort of told ourselves what we
Yeah.
should do and how an environment should look. So that's why I really like the author of The Talented Mr. Ripley, because it's just completely opposite, you
Yeah,
know.
yeah.
But it
Yeah,
gives you
no,
confidence just to be like, do what suits you.
yeah. No, I thank you, Aggie. And I think that that's really quite right. Yeah. I mean, being, as you said, being aware of what works for you, right? And giving yourself that permission to say, if a cafe works, I'm going to try a cafe. It doesn't need to be conformed to this very, in the library. Of course, we'd love to have you in the library. But for your own writing, if it doesn't work for you, that's completely okay. One piece of advice I received was you should always be writing when you're on a project, especially if you have a deadline. And I found that for me, it often built a bit of anxiety. I didn't give myself permission to actually have some downtime because I was always thinking, oh my gosh, I am actually here sitting in a cafe enjoying basically my Saturday morning, and I should be at home writing because this is a weekend and I'm not at work or I don't have classes. So I need to squeeze almost every minute of my free time so that I can write. And what ended up finding out is that I would just get completely tired, and I just at times just wouldn't even want to look at my writing project here. So I had to kind of realize that it's okay to build in some downtime, and that downtime is just as restorative to help me be writing as basically if I had just tried to say, okay, I'm going to sit at my desk for 8 hours, even on a weekend. Sometimes, yes, I mean, we realize that you have to do that, but that can't be the normal practice. At least for me, that was something I learned. Okay, anybody else would like to share before we move on? I see some typing coming through, so I'll just wait a few more seconds to come in before we pass that. Yeah, so we get the advice basically that the discipline and constant everyday writing, for example, at least half the page a day is a key to success. It may help avoid procrastination, but it adds anxiety. Yeah, yes, I think that yeah, that's often the golden rule. We'll talk about, for example, this golden rule of writing, of trying to keep a daily contact with your writing. But I mean, thinking about the lengths in which you and the goal that you set for yourself every day can often, if it's a bit too rough sometimes, or can often add to that anxiety as well. So thank you for sharing that. So we have approaches then to writing. And I think this is a way to kind of help us think about how do we approach our writing. And I'm taking this information from a book called Written by Beck Evans and Chris Mez, amazing writing coaches as well. And they identified in their own research 4 prominent approaches to writing from studies that they conducted. So there's spontaneous writing, daily writing, binge writing, and time boxing. So in terms of basically spontaneous writing, and this is a byproduct of being type poor. A lot of academics that they talked with were teaching classes, grading papers, had committee meetings and things like that. So how did they kind of build in time then to work and to write for themselves? And one of this idea of time confetti is quite nice because it's that those little pieces of time that you have throughout your day that are not maybe complete hours, but it's a 15-minute wait here. Maybe you have 30 minutes in between, basically meetings. And it's being able to just say, okay, I have this little bit of time. Let me just jump into the writing. And so it's writing a little bit at a drop of the hat there. You can kind of think about it is if you like cooking, how you set up all your recipes, all your ingredients beforehand before you start cooking. And that way it makes that when you're cooking, the process of cooking a little bit easier. If any of you have then forgotten to chop up some things while you're in the middle, you've got something on boiling on the oven, you'll know that it can often then all of a sudden become chaotic. But if you have all your ingredients ready, then it's just very easy just to jump into it and basically, in this case, start writing. There are a couple of downsides to this. So it's struggling to see the bigger picture of your project, right? You're not If you're writing in this type of way, you're not going to be able to bring your A game. It's maybe a bit rushed. It might not be perfect, but realizing that that's okay if you just get some words in. The positive is that you never lose contact with your project. In that sense, if you have 15 minutes, you're at least thinking about it that day, and you're able to write some words, write some ideas, put it all towards that project, and you're able to restart really quickly and avoid this concept of procrastination. So realizing that, I think this is quite nice of not bringing your A game to writing, then allows you not to kind of blame yourself if the writing is not 100%, but it's taking on the benefits of, okay, I am writing towards this, and then I will have basically enough stuff to start when I do have a little bit more time there. There is basically a like spontaneous writing called daily writing. It's often done in the same time and in the same place. It's often considered the gold standard of writing productivity because you are always coming to showing up to do your writing. It takes away the struggle of finding the willpower or finding the time. So if you say, okay, every day I'm going to write from 10 until 12, that's just a habit that I start building and having. Basically, you don't have to think about it very much. It's like, okay, when am I going to find the time to write? It also is, think it really helpful to it allows you to weather those storms in your writing, those type of low points where, okay, I just didn't write as much today as I've been doing the last week. And kind of like Franz Kafka, when we kind of go through those dry spells of nothing feels productive, but we're still showing up every day, that we can come out at the other end once that inspiration, once things start to click again, we can come out that other end of that dry spell and really have that information just to work off and keep writing in a way. So that's something that can be really well said about daily writing. Notice I'm not talking necessarily about the word goals yet, but just that process of writing daily here. Um, there's also this idea of time boxing, and this is influenced by Carl Newport's deep work approach, particularly the idea of a fixed schedule of productivity. And I think what's really important, or what I really like about this, is also deciding on the schedule allows you to find a good balance between basically the effort of work and also this type of home life relaxation, basically a schedule that you have. Because this idea that, you have to build in some time also to restore yourself. You can't be working all the time there. So it's being able to have your writing commitments alongside other life commitments there. And this can be anything from putting time on your calendar to joining writing groups that around you. And then there's the idea of binge writing here. And I know that binge writing is often spoken about in very negative terms. The last thing you want to do is basically pull all-night writing sessions or marathons. And often when we think about that, we're talking about, binge writing approach. It often is associated with a 1980 study on procrastination. And I think where this confusion comes is basically the study was studying actually procrastination, not writing process in a certain sense. So I would like to think about how can we reorient this concept of binge writing here. And I think what that means is looking at your schedule and seeing blocks of time where you can really just throw yourself into the writing as well. So this could be, for example, we had a writing retreat last academic year, and we spent 3 days together just really writing. We had structured writing time, structured breaks, and things like that. So in a certain sense, that was a bit of a binge writing session. So it doesn't necessarily mean that it's a negative thing. It's just that we saw there was a nice block of time, the people that came to the retreat, and that's what we were going to focus on. So that could be a binge writing session. And one of the things that's nice about these type of things, if you go to a retreat or you basically have a block of time that you're going to dedicate towards writing, is that it kind of works on this type of grand gesture approach. So you may have heard about writers who were working on Wall Street and decided to give up their job and move to a cabin and become a writer. Or basically, they were working full time and decided to go part time so that they could use the rest of the time to write that novel or write that book of poetry that they always wanted to write. It's a grand gesture. That is something that you're making a commitment to say, okay, I have given up this to do this, and so in your mind, it then gives you the permission to say, okay, I'm just going to do this. So you may think about that in your grand gesture or your binge writing sessions that you can schedule in. And I think that's the important thing is that these are scheduled in sessions, not, oh my gosh, I need to basically shut myself off for a week because I haven't been able to touch it. Those are quite different things. Any questions at this point that you'd like to ask or anything like that? Okay, I'm just gonna then close the chat again, so we can continue. So we have then now thinking about strategies for stronger writing here. And I think here's one. Pretermit obfuscatory lexicographical constructions. And what does this mean? The title means avoid word choices and sentence structures that deliberately make writing unclear. And this is often playing off the idea that there's an academic myth that intellectual writing should be obscure and sound intelligent. Basically, when somebody reads your writing, only the esoteric initiated should be able to understand what you're trying to say, and that makes you much more intelligent, much more valued in academic in the academy. And I think that's a myth because complex ideas don't necessarily require overly complex ways of writing. So remember, if we draw back to what we were talking about writing as a conversation, who are you talking with, right? Your writer. So yes, it's not necessarily thinking about, say, I need to avoid complex words, because there will be certain words, jargons that are necessary in your writing, but it becomes down much more to writing clearly, to write in a way that it's understood, to see that your ideas, the flow of your ideas clearly, rather than using a conjunction of sentences that makes it very hard to understand what is this person saying at all here. So with that in mind, there is an activity that I'd like us to do. I sent out a Word document in our email yesterday with this meeting link. So basically, I'd like us to read the examples in the handout, and then because it's Word, you can mark places where you think are obscure and think about why they're obscure. So I'd like us to work on that for maybe about 7 minutes, if that would be good. That way we have some time to kind of read through them, mark them, and then we can talk about them when we come back as a group. Okay? Are there any questions at all? Okay. If you have any questions, I will be monitoring the chat here. So no questions. Great. Thank you, Aggie. Wonderful. So I'll turn off my camera and I'll be monitoring the chat. If you have any questions, just go ahead and drop them into the chat here. All right. So good luck, everyone. Alrighty. So we've got to the end of our time with this exercise. So any thoughts or ideas of the writing pieces, things that were unclear, or where the writer, I think, purposely made things unclear? We can start with perhaps example number one. If you like, you can also put it in the chat as well, or you can talk, yes. So here we go. Yes, attempt to substantially, in the first example, broaden the phenomenological concept of sense. It's a bit too long, that part there. Okay. Yes, what is one and the other? But first and foremost, a relation that unfolds in between the one and the other. Also too long. We've got some other people writing. We'll only focus on example one, but thank you for also putting example number two. A nice flurry of typing happening here. So this, I'm really excited to see what we're coming up with. Yes, so yes, the imminent accomplishments, yeah, and also unfolds in the subject's relation with those it encounters in the world, who make this world appear to it, disappear, and finally disappear. Yeah, this is very unclear of what it means. Also some other things coming in. Never makes clear why it's utmost importance of the context of intrinsic relationality, and then focus on phenomenological, suddenly doesn't take the reader with them. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, these are really clear. Too many nouns, adverbs in a row. certain parts, for instance. Yeah, imminent. Yes, and I think we're all hitting on it right. Yes, the first example, it really is a series of unclear writing. Intrinsic relationality. What does that mean? I think this is a question that I would ask. What does intrinsic relationality mean in this context? And granted, yes, this is only an excerpt, but that fact that the reader has this type of question, I think, and it's not really explained clearly what that is at this point, makes it somewhat problematic. Also, these bigger sense of phenomenological concept of sense. Again, what is this type of thing? The relation that unfolds in between the one and the other. I think many of you have pointed to this. Yes, and phenomenologic. Yeah, yeah. What are these type of things? Why the difference between the dis with a y and the disappear as it's regularly spelled? So yeah, again, I get the feeling that this is a bit of a type of almost only esoteric for the initiated people that will understand this type of things. Example number two is very interesting as well. Um, it maybe was a show of hands on the show of hand function. Was the language a bit more, I would say, down to earth on this example? And if you agree, give us a show of hands or things like that. Yeah, show of hand. Yeah, down to earth. Language that's not really complicated in and of itself. All the words, maybe with the exception of epoche, which is a word we might not often use. But okay, we're not arguing that every word has to be. You don't need to look up a little bit. But yeah, so a good show of hands that there was a bit of down to earth. We've got some typing, so I'm not going to say a bit further. I'll wait for you all. Yeah, a bit of a match of two halves. Yeah, second sentence onwards lost. A little clearer, yes. But yes, you also didn't seem to relate back to the original statement. Yeah, and I think what's important, why did I include this second example? Because I think even though the language here is not overly complex as it is in the first one, it is somewhat still difficult to get a sense of what the author is trying to say in this example. So as I said, there's maybe one word that maybe you need to look up. And as I said, we're not advocating not to use any type of jargon or specialized language, but even in this type of down to earth, not overly complex writing, it is still difficult to get a sense of what the writer is trying to say. That it is a little bit clear to kind of go through the sentences, but what is this take it for grantedness of factual normative orders that have turned brittle or collapses? Or what is this pre-normative though not lawless space? Why? Why is it not lawless? What do they mean by that there? So in sense, I showed you those examples because even though it is not an argument, as I said, from basically complex language and therefore just writing clear language and that solves the problem. But this is more an argument of basically you need to be able to write clearly with your language, and the language needs to to be in a way that your writing is not open for misinterpretation. So that is more of the argument in these two. Let me just get my teams back up and presenting. Yeah, that is more the argument of these two examples is that you shouldn't necessarily basically think that just because you're writing in a less overly complex or simple language that's gonna prevent you from being misunderstood. So yeah, that would be that. But thank you for basically for participating in this exercise here. So some things that you can do then to help you is to not lose the thread. So remember we talked about your writing and building that coalition and giving your reader that thread of argumentation through your project is basically reverse outlining your writing. This can be really helpful here because it could help you determine whether your paper meets its goal that it set out to do. So reverse outlining, you start with a complete draft. You create an outline, number each paragraph. and then want to write out the main idea of that paragraph in maybe one sentence or in a couple of words. And what it does is it really quite nicely basically allows you to skim the side of your writing and see how your ideas are unfolding and see where, for example, maybe you might have gone off track a little bit because this one idea that you encountered was really interesting and you thought you would write about it, but then see whether it actually relates back to the main idea that you're trying to present in your writing. It can also help see where the reader might have trouble following the order of ideas, and I think this is really good. Do where paragraphs repeat maybe the same idea, and is that something intentional that you want it to happen? Or is it something that maybe you can combine paragraphs and make the idea a little bit much more concise and a bit stronger? I can also see whether basically one paragraph is juggling several topics. And this is something also very common as well. So because when we were thinking, as I said, writing is a part of thinking. Sometimes our ideas jump, our thought process jumps to another idea. But in terms of the writing, is it clear, or are we tackling a bit too much with basically our writing? So some ideas to help then get unstuck in our writing. And that's, as I said, it's common. We all will face points where we just feel a bit stuck. So thinking about basically templates and what I mean by that. And I think when we think about the writing process, we can often think of it as, step one, start with an input, and that can be your source material, your data, fieldwork diaries, whatever you have. Then step two, something happens in that middle stage, and step three, we have a draft. And templates can be a way of just thinking about to give us a little bit of control of that form and give us a clear picture of what happens in that middle, busy, frenetic, interconnected space that kind of shifts in that intellectual process of that middle part here. So a template is a specific set of containers that you can use, and I think about them as containers, in advance to fill your writing. And this might look like, for example, an outline. An outline can be a really good template of basically, document headings, certain points of how your argument is going to unfold. Other ways you can do it is maybe you like writing the main ideas out on Post-it notes. If you're a bit visual, you then put them on the wall, and then you can see where basically on a visual, use different color Post-it notes for different sections, see where the balance is on that type of thing. It can be flexible in that way as well. But also basically, here's also the idea for we think, so they provide forms, but they also provide boundaries of what basically your writing can basically look like here. Because often, for example, containers, if we don't have containers, like we can fill our time and fill our writing process very quickly. So if any of us have ever wanted to say, okay, I'm just going to sit down and read for the next 30 minutes. And let's say you get into the reading so much that all of a sudden, when you check your clock, you see that you've been reading for almost 50 minutes here. So basically, the original time that I set out was exceeded because I just lost track of time here. So this can also be basically almost be like a literature search, what we talked about for a research project. So thinking about, okay, how many sources do I really need in order to know that it's good enough to move to the next stage? So if I'm looking at basically research projects, and for example, most of them have maybe about 50 sources that they're using for the literature search, and I've already have almost close to 80 sources. Maybe this would be a good time to say, okay, traditionally or more likely projects at my stage deal with about 40 to 50. I have around 80. Maybe it's time I move into the next stage and start thinking about the writing process. And then if I need to come back more and get more, I can do that rather than focusing so much time on getting more sources here. So why do we need templates and using the template? And I think one of the reasons is so many of us can struggle in the early stage of writing because it's extremely difficult to understand and create something that we've never created before. So I'm thinking about, for example, if you're doing a master's project, and this is something that I found out when I was doing my own master's project, it was the uncertainty of what goes into a dissertation. So I came from an English literature background, and I was doing a master's in the social science field, and I really didn't know kind of what that process looked like, what went into it. And so one of the things I did, and I think that was really helpful for me was that I had access to other master's dissertations. And I was able to read through them and see how they were structured, see basically how parts were divided. And so this is incredibly helpful for me because as I was planning out my own dissertation, then it gave me a bit of a, as I said, a template of what a good master's project looked like there. Um, Also, so where do we go for these types of resources here? And I put a little bit on a link to our LibGuide here on theses here at the University of Cambridge. There's ProQuest, also dissertations and theses. And this is the great way to see basically how other writers in your discipline may have tackled certain problems or certain issues. And here it's really good when we think about basically reverse outlines. You could also look at something and reverse outline it for function rather than content. So remember we talked about reverse outlining for content, our own writing, our draft, mapping out ideas. When we want to reverse outline for function, we think about basically, okay, what is the writer doing with this section? So let's say it's a literature review. And in the first opening paragraph or paragraphs, they are setting out that context. So that's it, okay, for literature review, if most literature reviews set out this context in the first paragraph, that might be a paragraph where I want to set out the context for my own project here. When they introduce new sections in the literature review, maybe they're pulling out themes, maybe they're pulling out debates, maybe they're organizing it basically chronologically. That might be a way to approach my own literature review. So this is giving you ideas to kind of help basically structure your own writing. It's not basically doing the writing for you, but it's almost a little bit like a type of Mad Libs where basically you have a sentence, you fill it in, you fill it in with basically a word, and at the end of the exercise, you have basically this interesting, very story. So it's a bit like that. So basically, again, using the template, and I think it comes down a little bit to ingredients and versus recipes. So any of you have cooked for yourself, or when you've gone off to the university, I found myself having to cook for myself. And sometimes you will know that basically what's for dinner. You get home, maybe all of you live very busy lives, and sometimes what is for dinner, and that can be determined by a couple of different things. So basically, ingredients and recipes. What is for dinner tonight is what I have in my cupboard. So I have the ingredients, I need to put them together, and I need to get dinner out of that. Or maybe you feel like eating this wonderful pasta at home, and basically you need, for example, pasta sauce, you need a certain type of pasta, maybe fusilli, or basically other penne. Maybe you also want to put some other things in there. Maybe the recipe calls for meat or seafood or things like that. So you're going to cook according to whatever the recipe tells you to do that. And templates are a little bit like that. That's the way I've been talking about it. They provide a bit of a recipe for you to think about how you want to organize your own writing there. Does that make sense a little bit? Or should I say a little bit more? You can pop it into the chat.
It would be great, maybe Alberta, about was it reverse outline, but I'm happy maybe at the end just to give a bit more information about that, because that's something I'd like more on. But the template I think is okay for me. I don't know about others.
Okay, yeah. So talking about reverse outlining for writing, sure, we can talk about that at the end if you like. Yeah. Oh, we've got one more some typing in. Thank you so much. Before I move on, I'll wait for the type coming in. Great, thank you so much. All right, so let's talk about writer's block. All of us may have experienced it a bit. And when we think about writer's block, it's not something necessarily wrong with us, but we can think about some of the possible causes of what is causing this type of writer's block. And I think one of the first big things is, we are all adjusting to a new form of writing here. For example, if you've done undergraduate writing, and that calls for a specific type of writing. And now you've moved into a postgraduate study of writing. Now you're writing longer research papers or, for example, master's dissertation. So these will require basically new types of how we express ourselves and the type of things that are required to basically make that new form more adequate for our need and for the needs of the reader. So that's one thing here. Writing for a reader or readers who have been overly critical or demanding in the past. So, maybe you have submitted something, a draft for a reader, and they've come back with some bit harsh feedback here. Obviously, that can, next time we are going to submit something, and the thought of submitting something to that reader might cause us to kind of say, okay, now everything has to be perfect, every word, every sentence on this draft. And that struggle or that work towards perfection, what it ends up doing is it kind of ends up grinding us to a halt. We find ourselves often sometimes writing, thinking, okay, it's all horrible, erase it, and then coming to a halt here. Also thinking about negative criticism that we might have received in the past. It's always a funny thing because it doesn't matter in a certain sense, at least in my experience, how many basically positive comments you might have had. Maybe you've given a presentation, maybe you've written something, and over the course of time you get positive feedback. But it's that one negative feedback that you get that kind of sticks in your head, and it kind of basically comes back to it, and you keep remembering. And it's almost like it's self-defeating. Basically, you kind of erase everything positive that you've done, and you focus only on the negative. So it's remembering that type of negative criticism that you received in the past that basically it kind of stops you from wanting to write. There's also working with limited time or with a lot of unstructured time here. And I think that can be deadlines. We all need them. Some of us, we work better with a deadline that's almost right around the corner. Sometimes, but having that right around the corner sometimes can be counterproductive, because then it may lead to a short circuit with us that we can't write because the deadline is right there. Other times, if we have a deadline that's further down the line, we think, I've got plenty of time, I will just sit and write, and all of a sudden nothing comes. So how do we structure? And it becomes a question about structuring our time so that we are a bit more productive. And last but not least, I mean, we all have to recognize that we sometimes may deal with some troubling events outside of school, outside of our academic life, and recognizing that that's something that that is important. It's also basically can be contributing to this lack of writing that we may be doing there. So working through then writer's block, and basically it's first step, I think, would be identifying your own strengths. And I think that's really important here, because often you may have heard this sentence, sometimes we are our own worst critics. So as I said, we may have received that negative feedback or that harsh critical feedback from somebody else, but then what we end up doing is becoming our own worst critic and striving for that type of perfect thing. So you might basically make a list of some of the things that you do well. And this is a way to kind of get past that critical mind. Say, okay, you know what? What I do really well is I make my organization in my writing very clear. If a reader comes to the piece of writing, they will see very clear that the distinctions between, for example, topic A, topic B, topic C, or issue number 1, 2, and 3. So I make doing that I'm really good at that. I'm also really good at, for example, explaining evidence that I introduce into the text. So these are just some examples of some things that you might want to, that you might be good at. But it's important to sometimes have that list, especially when that overly critical mind is kind of getting at you. If you are at that point where you can't come up with a list, maybe you're a bit more critical, get a colleague or a friend, somebody to read your work and say, can you tell me what are some good features about this writing? And it's always helpful to remember basically what it is you do good. And then basically, as I said, recognize that writing is a complex process. Writing is an attempt to kind of fix meaning on a page. But you know, you and your readers know that there's always more to be said on the topic, right? I always feel like, gosh, what is a cutoff point that I need to have so that I've completed my project, but I've also shown my reader that I know enough about the project here. And that can often be a very difficult, basically, boundary to have, right? Um, to feel knowledgeable about a topic and but realize that, you know, this is a very time-bound project as well. So I said we took about flow and basically thinking about this coherent pieces of writing, but also realizing that over a long project, that flow might get somewhat basically mixed up, but that's okay because we'll build in enough time so we can come back, revise, and clear out anything. So it doesn't need to be perfect, I guess is what I'm trying to say, on the first time out. And also think about yourself as an apprentice. And basically, remember we talked about this cause of writer's block as getting used to a new type of writing, especially if you haven't written a lot in recently, or you've moved up a level from undergraduate to postgraduate. So it's helpful to have this a type of apprentice mind, that you know you are learning the conventions of your discipline and how to write the conventions in the conventions of your discipline in a new way. And you know, if you were already a master, then you would have already, you know, either gotten a degree or you wouldn't need to gonna go through this process here. So you know, realize that you're writing a new format, you're writing longer papers than before, you're writing also for new audiences, and the expectations of your readers will have changed as well. Maybe you're writing in a new subject matter, or basically you're also turning in writing from different stages of the writing process. So now you're moving from basically the planning stage and that very drafty stage to a bit more polished. So thinking about yourself as this type of apprentice that you're learning helps to reduce some of that anxiety that you already have to put something out that's in pristine master condition there. So one exercise that I like to do is free writing here. So we're going to take about a minute. We're going to do a free writing exercise here. And I'd like you to take 1 minute to think about your research project, or maybe something that you're working on right now, or something that you want to work on. Maybe you already have a section divided, and think about something that you'd like to develop a little bit more. So I'll give you about a minute and to come up with that idea that you'd like to write on, and then we're gonna do a little bit of free writing here. So I'm gonna give you 1 minute, and I'll turn off my camera. That way, I'm not like Big Brother looking over you.
Sorry, Alberto. Sorry, just to clarify, is it 1 minute to think of something we want to write about?
That is correct. Yes, Aggie. Yeah, just 1 minute
Okay,
just to get that
perfect.
idea fixed before we jump into it.
Okay, thanks. Sorry.
You're welcome. All right. So hopefully you have this topic of what you'd like to develop a little bit more. You'd like to write. So now we're going to do a little bit of an exercise. So for 5 minutes, I just want you to write without thinking a bit too much, basically about this topic that you've identified here. We're gonna start with basically you can start with a couple of prompts. This research is important, or this section is important. The idea is to kind of make that analytical mind take a back seat and just let your ideas, your creativity, your feelings just come out here. There is only one rule with this little 5 minute exercise here that we're going to do, and that's to write as fast as you can, not as well as you can. So you're not allowed to use a delete key in these 5 minutes. You're just going to write. And if you get stuck on words, pick another different similar word and just carry on. And if you think you need to look something up later, you can make a little note in brackets just to kind of identify that for yourself here. And then I'll call time and then we'll go into the editor. But just for right now, for 5 minutes, we're just going to write really quickly on this topic that you've identified here. So I'm going to put a timer on, and 5 minutes, I said, as fast as you can. All right, great. So I will turn off my mic and camera, and I'll see you in 5 minutes. All right, go ahead and call time for 5 minutes. So, go ahead and bring that to your writing to a close. So now for the next 3 minutes, I'd like you to do a light edit. That means by moving stuff around. We're not necessarily going to polish that free writing that you did, but just move stuff around to give it a little bit of more order. And then also you can delete anything that just doesn't make sense at all, just because you kept writing. But so do that light deleting, light organization, but no polishing at this moment. So for 3 minutes, that's what we're going to do. So I'll start the timer now. All right. So at this point, you should have organized your free writing a little bit. So now we're going to take 5 more minutes. 5 more minutes of the same process of that free writing that we did in the first stage. So we'll write. Remember, write as fast as you can. Get the ideas out. So 5 minutes more. Okay, and I'll share my timer again. All right, I'll go ahead and we'll call time. How did that go for everybody? Anything particularly work or any insights? Got some
Well,
typing
I've
coming up.
written something.
Yeah, yeah.
I've written something which I didn't think I would write. It's just that because it's a short span of time, I just wrote it. I wasn't planning to write it, but I think it's just very playful and maybe it's not useful to anybody else. But I haven't tried to make it something that would make sense to other people. That's on a downside, but I suppose it's intriguing just because it's very simple and it speaks of emotions rather than trying to prove something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, and I think that's one of the benefits of this exercise is that it allows you to kind of get out these words and get them out perhaps in a very unstructured way. Um, but I think the important thing is that you've got stuff then you can work with here. Yes, I have some other comments here. Really helpful process. Barriers to writing, yes. Um, Good way of overcoming writer's block. Yeah, because you can dive straight away into writing. Um, yeah, being redundant in the argument and therefore have to read more on my variables. Okay, is that something that maybe came out of the writing? I have to see some more typing coming up, so I'll wait for a little bit more of that.
I had to curb some of my base instincts to edit as I wrote,
Yes.
accepting that that's a typo or the word structure is, yeah. So it was actually quite difficult with the first sprint to stop myself doing that. And I found myself, my hand just going to the delete button or the backspace button without even realizing.
Yeah.
Um, but it is, I think, helpful for just getting it down on the page, even though that is, I think, how I write anyway and move stuff around and sort of dump some thoughts down and then restructure. But yeah, just forcing oneself to actually do it rather than, okay, I've thought about this in my head. It's not a logical running order, and therefore I'm not going to write it down, and I'm going to mull it over for longer. It
Yeah.
was helpful to avoid that quasi procrastination that I think I'm prone to.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's really great to hear. Yeah, and I think that's just yeah, I said it's a nice little exercise sprint that to get you when you're stuck a little bit, just to get what you're stuck about perhaps, or to kind of put it on paper. And as we talked about that idea of fixing meaning on paper and how that can be difficult. Once you have it, then you can give it a little bit more structure to kind of say, okay, yeah, I don't like this part here, or this part needs a little bit more development. So you've got something to work with rather than trying to get it out perfect on the first go. So as I said, Nick, it's really nice that I guess if you're procrastinating or unintentionally procrastinating, also because it's got to be great, you have something on the paper that you can then start working with and then being a bit more productive. All right. Well, thank you so much. So we've got only about two more slides, and I realize we're already at time. So I'm just gonna sprint through them here really quickly. So what you're going to get then with the copy of slides is a set of prompts as well that can be really helpful when you're doing this type of exercise. So basically, these prompts could be like, write about a specific topic. What insights do you have? Write about what everyone says about this topic. Do you agree or disagree? What's bothering you about this piece of writing or idea? And I think this is where it's kind of good to kind of like check your emotions about like what is really getting at this writer's block. What's hard about this chapter or section? And in a certain sense, just getting these ideas out can help you then kind of rearrange and address some of the things that maybe you didn't see were there in the first place, but will emerge afterwards here. And also, here's my best guess about what's happening in my data. And again, that could be really helpful to, say, okay, after you step back and look at it, say, oh, okay, I can really see that I need to do a little bit more research on this, for example. Or actually, I'm quite well basically researched on that. This other part needs further support. So yeah, you'll get these sets of prompts as well in the slides. So then after the free write, we've got these words. Maybe you're in this little bit of exercise, you were able to put out maybe a couple of 100 words, or maybe 100 words or 50 words. But writing side by side, the side by side rewrite can be really helpful. Because, and you think about this, I think a little bit about the work of translation when you have a text and then you're trying to translate it into another language to have meaning. So you can think about, you know, if you have your written information on one page, you print it out, or one screen, and on the next screen you just try to make sense out of it on another new document, or if you're writing side by side. And so you've got the material, you've got the main ideas, what you were trying to say. So now just trying to translate it into a little bit more structure, a little bit much more readability for your reader. You can try a paragraph recipe, and we'll see a little bit like that. What this means. So is it letting me navigate? No, it's not letting me navigate. Oh, now it's slowed down. So a paragraph recipe, and this could be, you know, these very famous acronyms like topic, evidence, explain, and link. All these little acronyms for how a paragraph should be structured. So you could try something like that. Try organizing it to basically a type of template of a strong paragraph, and you can often find these if you search. But I'll put a link in as well on this slide for some paragraph recipes as well. The Manchester Phrase Bank is an excellent resource. And it has some really interesting templates of, you know, how to, for example, transition from one section to another. How do you introduce information? And it's got these phrases that you can use and give you some examples of how to kind of do these type of things. So yeah, you can put those phrases in and link your free writing. And also, again, you can also reverse outline your free writing. And so we were talking a little bit about this idea of reverse outlining. What is it? And so the way I think about it is it's a short summary of what you have already written. So if you've written a couple of paragraphs, you say, okay, the main idea of this paragraph is, and then a short summary of what that paragraph is talking about, what the idea of that paragraph is, and then you go down to the next paragraph and you say, okay, this paragraph is dealing with evidence, and then the next paragraph. And it's a way to kind of see the flow of your writing and organization of your writing without necessarily having to read through all the paragraphs. So it's a bit of a type of guide, the way I would think about it, on the side or on the margins of your writing. And I said, this is kind of helps you to see basically if your arguments are unfolding logically, or the flow is there, or maybe you're talking about too many things in one paragraph. So the same way with this free write, after you've written all these ideas out in an unstructured way, you can try to reverse outline it and see, okay, what are the ideas that are emerging here? How can I perhaps rearrange them in a way that makes the flow a little bit better? Aggie, you have a question? Yes.
Hi there. Yeah. Hi. Thanks, Alberta. Yeah. Just to explore that a bit, is there some sort of almost template, if you will, for reverse outline? Like, what kind of things should go into, so in the margins? Like, is it typically just a summary of what you're trying to say, the purpose of the paragraph, or, you know, yeah, are there particular ingredients that you should use to almost structure the reverse outline?
Yeah, so the way I've often thought about it is it's kind of looking at what you do have there, rather than looking at what should be there. So by giving uh, a very small like summary of what is actually written, and is why I think it's important to have like the draft. That way you can kind of work down the margins. Then you're telling yourself, or you're showing to yourself basically what is actually there. And it could be, as I said, it could be a short sentence of, okay, this paragraph is talking about, let's say, this topic here. And the next paragraph is basically providing evidence for the topic. Topic A, let's say, for example, here. It's introducing that. So it's something very short. That way you can skim down the margins of your writing and see basically what's actually there, and if something needs to be added, or something needs to be reorganized, or something needs to be kind of separated. So that's the way I think of it. It's not necessarily written in so long of a manner. Does that make sense? Or is that,
sense. I get it. So it's not so much about critiquing what should be there. It's about sort of almost having a good understanding of what is there, and then later you can, now that you know really what is in there, is a very quick, brief summary in the margins, whether that needs to change. Okay, yeah, that does make sense now. Thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah, I'm really happy there. Thanks. That's a really good question. And so we've reached the end of our presentation, and I just want to say thank you for basically sitting in with me this last hour and a half. I'm going to stop the recording now, but if you have any questions, I'll take them off after we stop the recording here. Okay, great. Thank you.
Thanks, Alberto.
There we go. Thank you, Nikhil. Thank you very much.